UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Infinite diversity.
Live long and prosper, and welcome to Infinite Diversity, a Star Trek Universe podcast here on the United Federation of Podcasts Network. I'm your host for today, Justin Oser, and joining me are my incredible co-hosts behind their dark veil. It's Brandon Shamatala and Chrissie De Clerck-Szilagyi. So, Brandon, how are you doing today?
I can't answer that question because of my culture. That's just information that I can't give you.
That's okay. I'm sure there is nothing wrong with that. There is no secret underneath that whatsoever, so we're fine.
Yeah, I can't even confirm or deny that. We just can't talk about that.
Got it.
But you could tell me everything about you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'll send you my entire autobiography that I've been working on since last year, so you can know everything about me, my culture, my species, everything. So, Chrissie, how are you doing?
I'll tell you after I open up this secret window in order to get my information and orders from far away.
Yes. Well, before we tell you about our topic, let's introduce our special guest. It is Star Trek author James Swallow. So welcome back to Infinite Diversity.
Hello, folks. Good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, great to have you. So I know we had you previously talking about a Discovery Season 3 episode, Unification 3, and that was a lot of fun. And in the meantime, you have had a Star Trek novel come out. So in early January, The Dark Veil, which is a Star Trek Picard novel, but also a Titan novel primarily. So we're going to be talking about that today, and you're showing the cover, which we'll have, have for the show art.
I just want to say that before we get into this book, James, I was really disappointed when I started reading this book. You have no idea. Because I opened this up, and it was The Dark Veil. I was totally expecting a Mirror Universe adventure with Christine Vale.
With Christine Vale.
Oh, I was so let down.
What makes you think it isn't a mirror version of her? She could be doing like a Luca, sneakily pretending to be her parallel universe version.
Ooh. Yeah, so actually before we get into it, I know that it's been a couple weeks since we had our last episode. We don't have any new Star Trek on the horizon, but we thought it'd be really fun to do some stuff in between seasons. Don't have any news to cover this week, so we're just going to head into talking about this new Star Trek novel. Now, listeners, if you haven't read this novel, I think that's okay for you to continue for a little bit. We're going to try to keep it spoiler-free so that you have an idea of what it's about, if you might want to check it out, which I hope you do because I think it's a great novel. And then we'll let you know when we get into spoilers on this. So let me actually just start out, since, of course, we have you here, James, as the author of this novel. Just kind of tell us a little bit about the genesis of it. So we had Star Trek Picard Season 1. And we know that Riker and Troy go off on the Titan after the end of Nemesis, but we didn't really see them on the Titan in the series. But tell us about kind of the genesis of it, the idea of it, kind of how it came about.
Sure. Well, it was our friend Kirsten Beyer, former Star Trek Voyager novelist, who's now working on the shows as a writer and executive producer. She came to me and said, are you interested in doing a Picard novel for us? And this was very early on. I didn't know anything about the show at all. Nothing had aired. I hadn't seen any scripts or anything. And to be honest, I was a little bit reticent about signing on to do it without having any knowledge of what the show would contain or what it would be about. So I said, well, can I read the scripts? Can I see what you're going to do? Because what direction is it going to go in? Because I wasn't even sure if the kind of writing that I do would be simpatico with the way that the Picard show was coming out, because we knew that Picard would be paced differently and have a kind of different texture to it. So after reading the scripts, I started generating some ideas, and our initial concept was actually a completely different story. We had originally been talking about covering 7 of 9 story between her return at the end of Star Trek Voyager and when we see her in Stardust City Rag in the show. And so we talked about that for a while, but I think the decision was made, but that was such a cool idea. Is something that maybe they would want to explore on the TV show. So they wanted to kind of keep their powder dry on that. So we started exploring other options. And 2 of the other options that came up were bits of narrative that hadn't really been played out fully in the TV show. One was what happens to Worf when he gets promoted to being captain of the Enterprise after Picard is, somewhere he dismisses himself from Starfleet after, turning in his badge and his gun, as it were. And the other idea was, what about a backstory for Riker and Troy? Because we see them on the Nepenthe, in their nice house cooking pizza, and it's like, well, how did they get to where they were? And because Will and Deanna are basically my two favorite, my favorite Star Trek couple, and I've written about them before in some of the other Star Trek Titan novels, they were the ones that really appealed to me straight away. So I said to Kirsten, let's tell that story. Let's find a way to expand that and explain what they were doing in the interim. And also it gave us an opportunity to talk about the character of Thaddeus, who doesn't appear in the TV show, but he is spoken of quite a lot. And you see a lot of the effect his character had on the other characters who are still around. Because spoiler alert, by the time that episode takes place, he's already passed away, but we never get to meet him. So this was an opportunity to explore that character and to build him out a little bit more for everybody who kind of felt sad about not knowing who Thaddeus was. So with all these different story elements and a few other kind of ideas that we had floating around, we kind of lined that all up and said, well, how can we tell all these story ideas and have a compelling plot line on board the Titan, but in the Picard series continuity? And that was where we started from.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as the kind of setting or time period, it's kind of at a specific place after, what we see in Picard for the attack on Mars, but before the supernova. Did you specifically want to kind of have it in that period because you thought this would be the really great place to kind of illuminate things about these characters and this ship? Because it is kind of a specific moment in time in this continuity.
Yeah, that was kind of like the sweet spot, really, because it's a year after Picard has resigned, and I thought that would be a good place to put this because it gives that decision a while to have bedded in, but we still haven't had the supernova happen yet. So there's still that ongoing threat of that kind of happening in the background. So there's jeopardy from that. And there's a lot of dramatic push and pull coming in from both directions. And also it's the right kind of age for Thaddeus to be a character where he can have a little bit of agency in the story. So all of those things kind of came together to make that the right place to tell this narrative.
Okay, great. Yeah. And actually at this point, maybe Chrissie and Brandon, I just want to ask you, because often we'll talk about kind of initial impressions, kind of your thoughts on the novel as a whole without getting into any spoilers and maybe specific questions that you might have for James off of that. So, Chrissie?
Did you watch HBO's Chernobyl before you wrote this or while you were writing this? I'm just curious.
No, I didn't actually. No. I've heard a lot of good things about that show, but I haven't seen it. Although I had been seeing a lot. It was airing on Sky TV here in the UK. So I was seeing a lot of the commercials and trailers for it.
Well, damn, I thought for sure you were, because there's the line where you have, in the end, the bill comes due for every lie that's told. One of the characters says basically that in Chernobyl, so I thought you were doing a little, but okay. Yeah, first impressions. All I could think about was if Praxis's Chernobyl, what's the Hobus supernova equivalent to? And there's a lot of very Cold War secrecy feel to this. And whereas you have in, say, The Undiscovered Country, that idea of the secrecy around Praxis prompting what we would read as improvement in the Klingon society, we have from this, the Hobus supernova is contributing to the collapse of that society. Similar to the way that we have the end of the USSR in reality. So that's all I could think about. And then there's another line where you're talking about openness with the Federation while they're in the trial, and all I could think of was Glasnost there. I wrote it next to it. So
yeah, you're dead right there. I mean,
okay, good.
As I write kind of spy thrillers as well as writing sci-fi stuff. Mm-hmm. I am fascinated by the Cold War era. Because I grew up in the 80s, under the threat of constant nuclear war, right? And so now years later, now that's kind of passed by, and we're kind of doing Cold War 2.0. Yeah. Looking back at that sort of older version of things, those sort of political events and those resonances are something that speaks closely to me as somebody living in Europe who experienced that kind of, not at a far remove. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely a lot of that kind of DNA is definitely in this story.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, Brandon, some thoughts from you?
I really enjoyed this book. Without giving anything away, there's the twist with the Jazari is really when my interest was really piqued with the story, and I didn't see it coming. And once it happened, I'm like, of course, this is what a wonderful way to tie in this book into the show. And it just, we'll discuss later on, but it just opened up my eyes and my mind for possibilities for how this story can tie in to the greater arc later on for the character of Thad. And that I'll definitely have some specific questions on that. But, it's been, as a fan of the books, I've been reading the books since I discovered Star Trek back in late 92, early 93 is when I started buying the novels. And the thing about Star Trek at the time is that, they're episodic shows, one and done. And so you can write a novel and it can take place at any time during the run of the show. And as a fan of the novels, it's been an interesting change to be reading these Discovery tie-in novels and these Star Trek Picard tie-in novels, because so far basically all of them are taking place prior to the show. So we'll get a book and all of our characters aren't there. It's basically focusing on one or two characters that we've had in the show, and so it's in kind of a different tone to get used to as a fan of the books. So, and this is kind of fits in there too, because this is something that's several years before we meet up with Picard in the series, and before Riker and Troy have retired on what planet is it? I'm so bad at names. Nepenthe. Before they've moved there. So, but it's good. It was a very good book, and both of these novels, Una's book, Last Best Hope, and this one here, I think have been probably, best novels to tie in, because they're telling the stories that we need to know and that we want to know as fans leading up to this, leading up to what we get in the series. So I just want to say good job on that right off the bat.
Well, thank you. And you make a good point there, Brandon, is a lot of the earlier shows, there's air between the stories. So, you can have the end, like you say about TOS, right? You can have the end of an episode, and then the next episode is it's been 3 weeks. It's like, oh, okay, there's 3 weeks we could fill in story there, But with Discovery and with Picard, you could barely put a short story in between the events of the episodes, because they all happen together very, very closely. So there's the sort of it's not really been an official directive, but I guess it is kind of official. It is that the books that are tying into those two shows, because we can't slot stories in between, what we're doing is we're expanding out the narrative of story elements that maybe the show doesn't have time to explain. So we don't have time to do an entire story about what Troy and Riker were doing before you saw them in this thing. So here's the place to tell that story in the book.
Right.
I think it's only I think the last couple of Discovery novels we had with Dave Galanta's Dead Endless, that kind of fits in the continuity of the show in a very clever way. And John Jackson Miller's The Enterprise War is kind of a parallel story to what's going on while Discovery is happening. But most of the Discovery novels we've done are looking back, talking about characters. Well, where were they before they came in here? And we've kind of repeated that with the Picard books, with Last Best Hope, that you're seeing events leading up to the decision that Picard makes. And with Dark Veil, you're seeing events immediately, well, not exactly immediately, but like a year after those events have taken place. So we're filling in little gaps, but we haven't got anywhere near to the actual events of the show, because that's happened in a completely different time period.
Right. And then with that, I've said on this podcast before, and I'll say it again for people that are listening, that my prediction for the next Discovery novel is whoever writes it, it's going to be Burnham's year with book. That's what I think, because they got to fill in that time slot, right? So that's just I think
the book I wanted to do. I mean, maybe one day I might even pitch this. I really wanted to do the life of Ash Tyler.
Like the actual Ash Tyler.
Sorry, James, I'm actually just pitching that one to market myself right now.
The thing, what's interesting about that character, just to kind of go off piece here for a second, we never actually meet the real Ash Tyler. We only ever see the hybrid version of him, And immediately I thought, we know where his story ends. Mm-hmm. Where does it begin? And I thought that would have been a fun thing to explore, to kind of have, Ash Tyler being who he was and exploring that character. And then the book ends with him being captured by the Klingons. And of course, we know how that all plays out. Who knows? Maybe that story, even if I'm not the one to write it, that's a story I'd really like to see or hear at some point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe I'll give a few thoughts, and then I think we'll go deeper into this. So I really love the novel. I mean, first of all, I was excited that, it is a Picard novel and it ties into events from Picard, which is great, but it's taking place on the Titan. And I've loved the Titan novels that we've gotten since 2005. I've read them all, really loved them. And I was wondering, like, okay, how is James Swallow going to handle this in terms of, you've even written some other Titan novels, and like which characters are going to come over and which ones are new. So maybe I'll just say at this point, kind of as we get deeper into it, I think we'll be getting into spoilers for the novel. So if you haven't read it, maybe go off and read it and come back and listen, or you can just listen and see what it's like and then pick it up. But, so one of the things is, so this is Titan in 2386. There are some returning characters. Of course there's Riker and Troy. That makes sense, right? We know that. But then you had, I think, a couple of other characters that returned. Vale as the first officer, which I love because I love Vale as a character. You had Ronald Carew, the Trill tactical officer, and then Karen McCready, which I didn't realize she was in a previous novel in Synthesis. So you had like a couple characters there, but I'm curious like about your process for determining like which ones you would bring over and not bringing over, some of the other characters from previous Titan novels.
I just want to add to that question first. So, and then if you can elaborate, because I'm guessing, I don't know, is this like stage one? Is there going to be more stages of the plan with you writers?
Well, the plan is a different thing. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay.
But to speak to Justin's questions there. So early on, in the discussions I was having with Kirsten, she's like, well, we'll do this. We're going to do this story. It'll be on the Titan. And so I said, well, we've got like an entire cast and crew fully fleshed out. We've got an entire series of stories here. What are we going to do with these characters? Because the Litverse continuity and the Picard Discovery current Star Trek TV show continuity differ. Things can't be exactly the same. And I was like, do we bring all of these characters over? Because there will be an expectation from the readership, or do we bring none of these characters over? Because if people who have never read a Titan novel, who may be coming to these books for the very first time, having seen the TV show, will have no clue about the Titan and that cast. But then we have our Litverse readers who will be coming to them because they read the books, and they'll have a certain expectation. It's like, how do we navigate between these two poles? And initially we talked about having a completely new cast, a totally new crew, nobody that you would recognize from the Litverse. And I have to admit, I kind of shut that down pretty soon, because I said,
thank you for doing that. I want to say thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
It felt like a wasted opportunity. And it's like, we've already got some great characters. Why would I want to, also it's kind of like, I'm a little bit lazy writer too. It's like, we've already done this. Why should I do the work twice? Right. So,
yeah.
So we talked about that, and it was like Vale is the character that was the breakout character for Titan. She's the one that everybody talks about, that is everybody's favorite. So it's like, we have to have, if we only do one character, we have to bring back Vale. That just goes without saying. And Kirsten was very fond of Ranal Carew, and she said, well, I kind of like him. Can we bring him back too? And I said, sure, why not? And then I put back Karen McCready in there. Karen is actually named after a friend of mine who's a science fiction and fantasy writer. And I always liked that character. So I put her in there. So we had those three characters from the existing Litverse continuity, plus Riker and Troy. And the other characters I created completely out of whole cloth. So, just as a new cast, just to kind of illustrate the idea that this is the Titan you are familiar with, but it's also not that Titan. So there's enough of a difference for it to feel different, but enough similarity for it to feel familiar to you.
I always thought Karen McCready was a reference to Kurt Russell in The Thing.
Yeah. I was going to ask that. I had that on my notes.
a lot of people have said that. Is that a reference? But no, she's a real person, and she's pretty much the way I describe her is exactly what she looks like. And she's one of my oldest friends, a proper dyed-in-the-wool Star Trek fan, big Jimmy Doohan Scotty fan. So I made her an engineer on board this plan, and she gets a promotion in the Dark Veil from assistant chief engineer to chief engineer.
Nice.
And she's a good friend of mine, and I just like the idea of her on the bridge doing her engineering thing. I think it's just a great role for her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I got a question about this, James. So when you're in this room, and I realize that we're going into season 2 of Lower Decks, that's going to have Titan at least in the beginning of it. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but has anybody mentioned Grand Admiral Thrawn at all in these types of discussions? Because Grand Admiral Thrawn was a character that was written for the very first, I don't know if they're the very first, but basically the 3 breakout Star Wars novels that came out in the early 90s. And this was a very popular character. And when Disney came over to take over the franchise, they basically stood up and said, we're burning the Litverse, that's all pretend stuff. And then all of a sudden Thrawn shows up in, I think it's in Rebels that he shows up, and then they write more novels on him and stuff. So they've now got a character that was created for a Litverse, that they've burned the Litverse but kept this character, and they're talking about him in the live-action Mandalorian show. Mm-hmm. He's probably going to show up in the Ahsoka show that's coming out. Has anybody mentioned this for these characters like Vale and Randall Carew and these things?
Well, it's interesting. I've had this conversation with people a few times. People have said, the Trek fiction now is in a similar position, as you say. When the new Star Wars movies were coming down the pipe, and a decision was made to brand them as the Legends books, and say, it's not fair to expect movie viewers to have seen all of these books and to have read all of them and assimilated all this information. So we're going to kind of do a clean slate. But the people at Disney, they're not stupid. They know good story, right? So they've got this buffet of Star Wars Litverse stuff. And Thrawn's a great character, so why wouldn't you want to pick and choose? And see, that's what they're doing. You don't just see it in that show. There's a lot of other places where they're picking bits out from the previous Legends canon and saying, we're going to recanonize this, maybe in a different way, maybe in a different sort of formula, but that's a great idea. Why shouldn't we use it again? And I kind of did the same thing with the Dark Veil, because this is a different continuity from the Litverse. And I think Vale is a great character, so I brought her back. As to those characters ever appearing on screen, that would be really cool, and that is way above my pay grade. So, I have no idea. I mean, I didn't even know about the Titan appearing in Lower Decks. I found out the same time everybody else did when that clip went
wow.
on.
Must have been a big surprise.
It was complete. I mean, it was... on the one hand, I was kind of like, oh, why didn't you guys tell me? I could have done something with that. But on the other hand, I was kind of like, I was just so happy to see the Titan there, because I had such a great sort of fanboy moment. Like, yes, there's our ship. Because I do feel, as one of the kind of writers who's helped to kind of shepherd that storyline and those ships and characters through the Litverse, I feel a sense of ownership. So seeing, our girl up there on the screen, the Titan coming along and being really cool as well. That was just such a sweet moment, I really, really enjoyed that. So seeing it kind of canonized like that, that was great. But beyond that, I mean, I would love to see that. I would love to see, let's go the whole hog, right? Let's get Katie Sackhoff to play Christine Vale. We always said that's going to be based her off of. She was kind of inspired by Cara Thrace from Battlestar Galactica. Let's see Katie Sackhoff come off and play her. That would be so cool, But as to any of that stuff happening, your guess is as good as mine.
You can get. I give you permission to put Katie Sackhoff, but only if you put in the background a Mandalorian mask. So
that's not Mandalorian. It's the green. It's fine.
A green mask. Yeah.
Anyways, but the thing is that the person you got to be mad at for not knowing that the Titan was in Lower Decks is David, because he's clearly taken his non-disclosure agreement way too seriously, right?
David Mack, God, that guy.
Yeah.
I'm being mean about him, but like he's one of my closest friends, and he's like a great working colleague with us. But it is difficult to sort of navigate all of this kind of stuff, because a lot of these things are played very, very close to the chest. I mean, I've said this before. I wrote a Lower Decks reference into the Dark Veil, and we took it out because this was, you have to remember what the time period was. Is that when I was writing this novel, all we had at that point was the cast and crew images from Lower Decks, and just a little bit of background about what the show was going to be about. Knew nothing else about it. I hadn't seen any scripts, any episodes, or anything like that. And I wrote a line of dialogue in, funnily enough, actually, where one of the supporting characters talks about having been transferred onto the Titan from the Cerritos. Kind of funny the way things turn out, right? And of course, Dark Veil is set like 4 or 5 years after the events of season 1 of Lower Decks. And in the end, it was Dayton Ward who was working with us on this as well. Dayton was part of the conversation in his role as kind of like a consultant to all the different Litverse stuff. And Dayton was the one who said, knowing the kind of guy that Mike McMahon is, we have no idea if he won't blow the ship up by the end of season 1. So if we say they're from the Cerritos and that ship gets destroyed at the end of season 1, we're going to look stupid. So,
that's okay. Just at the last minute, you could just make it the Cerritos A.
Yeah, the Cerritos D or something, whatever. So in the end, as sad as I was to drop that, I wanted to really put it in there because there was a discussion at the time. These people were saying, "Oh, it's a cartoon show. It's not proper Star Trek," and that's the kind of thing that really rubs me up the wrong way. I'm like, if it says it's Star Trek, if it says Star Trek at the front, it's Star Trek. So I wanted to put a Lower Decks reference in there to make it part of this Picard story, to show these things are all connected. But in the end, we decided to kind of let that go. But a missed opportunity there, I think.
Okay, so let's get into the story itself, because I know we've been talking about the characters and all of that. So basically, I think it's really interesting what happens in this story. It kind of opens up. You see Riker is in front of like a Romulan tribunal, right? And there are these other Romulan characters we haven't seen before. There's somebody who's a captain and a commander, I think or major, that's how they're referred to at that time. And there's this incident apparently that's happened, and then you kind of go back to that incident, and you're on the Titan, and they have this mission to basically, and this is where the Jazari come in, so they're helping to kind of repatriate some people. They have a Jazari crew member, Lieutenant Zaid, I think it is, and they're just going to kind of, okay, we're going to send all of you people off and see what happens, and then there's an accident and they have to get involved. I'm just kind of curious, James, as far as like setting this up and having, creating this race of the Jazari. Actually, I think if I remember right, there is actually a connection to a previous Star Trek episode, but I'm just curious like how you got this idea of the Jazari and they have this ship and they're just going to kind of go elsewhere, like where you kind of started from with that.
Well, I had a Titan story idea I was working on ages ago, actually, that was in my kind of, box of unused ideas. And it was the idea about this generation ship of colonists leaving the Federation and what that would mean to, the Titan has to escort them out of the Federation. And how the politics of that would work is what would happen if someone, it's funny, with the situation with this is way before Brexit or anything like that was actually even a possibility. It was just, to me, it was an interesting idea about people willingly deciding to leave the Federation and why they would make those choices. And I couldn't really make the idea work, and I filed that away. And then here we are several years later, and because of the events that take place in the Picard timeline, most importantly related to the kind of hawkish nature of the Federation after the Mars incident and their feelings towards the Romulans and the feelings towards artificial intelligences, suddenly there was a reason there for a group of people to want to leave. So it felt like it was suddenly very resonant, and also because of real world issues too. I have to be honest about that as well. All of these things were coming together to make the story suddenly feel like the what was missing from it was suddenly there. So to me, that felt like something very interesting to explore, and it slotted in very nicely with the themes I wanted to touch on, with the kind of, like, as Chrissie said, about the kind of the Cold War sort of vibe between the Romulans and the Federation. and in the middle of this, Riker, Troy, and Thad as this family unit with all these forces all around them, and you've got this small family unit in the middle of it with these forces acting on them. It gave me a kind of rich stew of ideas that I could thread a story out of.
Yeah, I mean, and you referenced it before, Brandon, but I think it's very interesting that you have these Jazari, and they're a little bit mysterious. They don't want to be transported or give too much information about themselves, right? And then it's interesting because you have the Romulans come by, including this kind of commander Madaka, and he has this Major Hellick, who we find out is part of the Zhat Vash, which was kind of created for Picard and really wants to root out any artificial intelligence. And you find that these Jazari really are these artificial intelligence beings. So I thought that was a nice way to kind of tie it into Picard, but also I think I found that interesting because in the Titan novels, including I think the one that you wrote, Synthesis, there is this idea of like these artificial intelligences that you even have as part of the Titan crew, and like what are they like and how do they fit in and all of that. So I'm just curious to have you talk about that as well, because I think having, of course, there's a long history of artificial intelligence in Star Trek, but I thought it was interesting that they're pretending to be something else, and Titan has had this, in the Litverse at least, had this kind of experience with these different kinds of artificial intelligences.
I mean, as a science fiction writer, I've always liked the idea of AI and artificial life. I think it's a really cool science fiction idea, and it does something that Star Trek does very well, is it holds up a mirror to the real world. Is, if we are creating artificial life, how does that reflect back on us as humans? How does the experience of AI tell us something about who we are and what our experience is as intelligent sentient beings? Those are all great sci-fi ideas, So, like you say, I explored some of that in the Titan novel I wrote, Synthesis. And part of the reason for that was I'm trying to redress the balance a little bit, because as you say, we do see AIs and robots quite a bit in Star Trek, but not really in the plus column. If you take away Data and Lal, who only got one episode, they're mostly bad guys. It's like the M5 computer is what people remember, or they remember, Landru or Val, these computers that were ruling human beings and just ruining their lives. We very, very rarely get AIs that are even friendly. Right up to date, even, I was saying, in Lower Decks, we get Ensign Peanut Hamper, right? Who's the little exocomp, and even she turns out to be a bit of a dick by kind of sacrificing her crew. And
Badgie as well as like and
Badgie, I forgot that. Yeah. So even then, it's like kind of we keep seeing it's a fun trope to do, but I felt like let's kind of redress the balance a little bit here. Let's have some AI characters who are more sympathetic, not necessarily our friends, but people that you could understand their point of view. They're not immediately out to destroy all humans, which to me feels like kind of just such a worn trope. So with the Jazari, I wanted to play around with that, and I also wanted to kind of gently poke the Federation on some of the things that they do. Is something we've seen in past episodes of Star Trek is people from the Federation disguising themselves as aliens, and then going down to people's home planets and kind of surveilling them. And checking them out and making sure that they're not going to destroy themselves or mess up the Federation or what have you. We've seen that a bunch of times in Star Trek. And I thought, well, what's to stop another species doing that to the Federation? And I thought that was a fun idea to explain. So the idea that the android beings that are the Jazari have created this mythological species. They've created a fictional alien race, which is the mask that they wear. It's the veil that they wear. The recurring theme of this book is about people lying about their true natures. And the Jazari, essentially what they're doing is they're spying on the rest of the Federation. They're analyzing them, and they're using this fake alien race kind of fascia as a way to do that. And there's a scene where they kind of reveal all this, and Riker and Troy are kind of like, oh, it feels a bit bad when it happens to us. It's okay for us to do it to other people. Well, maybe it's not okay, So that was kind of part of the reason I wanted to explore that. I think it's just an interesting idea to flip it around.
So talking about the Jazari and that they're AI and all of that. So Brandon, I know that you said when you found this out, you thought it was an interesting twist. Just talk about that a little bit. Like, how did you feel when that came up, or what does that contribute to the story?
So I loved this element of the story so much because it made me think of, like, it made me think of social media, and it made me think of a lot of the emotional climate that people have right now and the political climate that we've got going on, and how people are very much kind of just putting their opinions out there and stuff like this. And we got a lot of racism and hatred and stuff still going on in this day and age. And so as I was reading this book, thinking about this race, the Jazari, I'm thinking about things like somebody says something like, we don't like robots. We don't like artificial intelligence. As the Federation, we're banning this. And how does a species that is all that handle something like that? And I thought that was fascinating. Like pretend for a second I'm a racist person and I'm like, I don't like Jewish people, or I don't like black people, or whatever. I say this out and I spew this out, and I'm talking to somebody and I don't know that they're 50% that, or I don't know that their spouse at home is that, but I'm spewing these things out. How is that person reacting? They're not going to jump up and be like, well, some people will. Well, I'm that person, but you're going to get people who won't say that that's what they are and want to withdraw from that because they don't know how you're going to react when you reveal to them that this is who I am inside of me. I am that person that you're saying that you don't like and don't want to be a part of and don't want to associate with. And so, like, I don't know, I just found this to be such a poignant plot in our day and age right now, because people are just so vocal with things that they don't like. And it's something that people don't tend to consider. I don't know. I just truly, truly loved this storyline, James. I thought it was just wonderful.
Well, I said earlier about the kind of the recurring theme of the book is called The Dark Veil because it's a reference to a Benjamin Disraeli quote, but it's also talking about the metaphorical veil is lying about who you are and what you are. And the Jazari lie about what they are because they're afraid of exactly what you just said there, is they are afraid of being discovered, and they are afraid of what will happen if people find out what their true nature is. So they concoct this elaborate lie so they can exist in this world. And now they've reached a point where their fear of what will happen to them has become so great that they have to leave because they're terrified it could be the destruction of their whole species. Because the people that they've been kind of observing all this time, who they're kind of waiting for the right moment to say, pull off the mask and say, we're all robots. And suddenly now those people are saying, well, we hate robots and we blame them for this terrible thing. Of course, what are they going to do? They can't stick around. So they have to kind of figure out, well, we're going to have to leave. And so what could have been potentially a great association, a great kind of partnership between the Federation and the Jazari now is lost because of this decision that's been made, this kind of, the Federation's hawkish nature and their kind of feeling towards AIs, that AIs and androids are a destructive, negative force, is they're being pushed away from that. So that's very much kind of one of the themes that I really wanted to hit on in this story, is the idea of, what happens when you as a group, whether it's your society, your culture, your race, your creed, you are confronted by a society that you thought you could be part of that says, no, we hate you now. Where do you go when you have that presented to you?
Yeah, and that twist, like I didn't see that coming. Like when it was revealed that they were androids, I'm like, of course. What a wonderful way to tie this into the Picard show, because that's the driving force of the series. Like that's the driving force of the Zhat Vash's motivation. That's the driving force of what the Federation did, their motivation, Like, I don't know, just perfect. It was perfect tie-in.
And I also tried to, with Riker and Troy as our kind of voices of reason, during the course of the story, there is a moment where Riker's discussing this and, he's saying, I personally do not hold every android responsible for this terrible thing, but the problem is convincing everybody in the Federation to see that viewpoint, because people in the Federation, because they had this terrible event, they are afraid, and because they're afraid, they react strongly in a negative way, which is, we see this in the real world all the time. Yeah. And so, this is a recurring thread in the story where it's like people, individuals, small groups of people can work against the sort of impetus, this negative impetus of mass sort of negativity, but it's very difficult to kind of push back against that if everybody else is saying, no, we're moving in this negative direction, and you're saying, well, I want to be the one person pulling us back towards the positive. It feels like it's a very troubling situation to be in. It's a very, very dark kind of revelation for the character. But it felt like, because Picard is a show that has those kind of more mature themes in it, and because it's a show with a slower pace and a more thoughtful pace, it felt like this was the book where I could really explore that kind of idea.
Yeah. And it is, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but I mean, it is kind of heartbreaking that Riker and Troi are like, yes, this has happened since they're banned within the Federation, but not everybody feels like that, and I don't feel like it's always going to be like that. And then, of course, think ahead to Picard, and they do reverse that. So I imagine, like, after season 1 of Picard, that Riker finds this out, and he's like, hold on, I got a subspace message to send to see if I can contact these guys. But I thought that was interesting. But Chrissie, like, your thoughts on kind of the Jazari and then being AI, and what you thought of that?
I was also surprised by it, so that was fantastic. I was not expecting that. I think the analogy for the other, whatever the other is, whatever we've decided the other is, it's just perfect. And I think it's wonderful. It just by happenstance, we're talking about this on the day that it's Fred Korematsu Day. It's the day that we commemorate the guy who sued the U.S. government over the Japanese internment and lost, and then continued fighting for them to be freed and for reparations to be made. So that's a beautiful little coincidence there. But I love that idea of. I love it whenever the Federation gets its own rules tossed back at them. It's perfectly fine for us to wander around in your culture and pretend that we're a part of it, but it's not okay for you. Which, by the way, has
always bothered me in Star Trek that they even do that at all. I actually really don't like it that they do this surveillance.
It's not good, but it does harken back to a lot of what was done by Europeans in various indigenous cultures. And,
sure, yeah.
Not just in the United States, or not just in the Americas, but Africa too. But yeah, that is troublesome. And the idea of we have this technology and we're not going to share it too. So, but it was wonderful. I think between the two of you covered everything I was going to say.
Okay. So maybe I'll talk about something else. So, they do, I mean, what really happens toward the beginning is there's an accident on the Jazari ship and Titan has to become involved. At the same time, this is near the neutral zone. And so there is a Romulan ship that offers its help. And I think this is really fascinating because on this ship, the Othris, I think it is, you see these kind of two very different factions. You see the commander of the ship, Medaka, who is kind of very much about, honor in the sense of trying to deal as much as he can within his circumstances for being above board and trying to understand and be reasonable and maybe going back more to things we might see of Romulans in TOS. And then you have Major Helek, who's part of Tal Shiar or Zhat Vash, who's just, I don't know, like a fanatic really, and was actually affected, I think, by seeing the admonition, which you see in Picard. So there's these two very different kind of figures like struggling in here, and I thought that was interesting, of course, for making sure that we don't see all Romulans as the same, even under these changed circumstances with the supernova coming and all of that. So I know that Romulans are important in Picard season 1, but I just wanted to see, James, like your thoughts on when you were kind of bringing this in for the Romulans and these two characters in particular, Medaka and Othris. And also I saw this ship as kind of a mirror of the Titan because it's diverse, it has different species, and it's kind of like the Romulan version of the Titan in a way. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. That's the kind of core idea I had for the ship, for the Othris, was that it's the Romulan Titan. And I kind of conceived it in my head. I thought, I'm imagining there's an entire series of Romulan Star Trek novels, about the Othris, about the adventures that they've been having on their side of the neutral zone. But with the two characters, with Medaka and with Helek, what I wanted to do was encapsulate the two archetypes that we've always seen of Romulans. And there are essentially, there's two. There's the Mark Leonard Romulan, which is the sort of the honorable warrior, the, you know, in another life we could have been friends, that guy. So, you know, he could be the enemy, but he's an honorable man, and he's trying to strive towards being the best person he can. And then the other kind of Romulan that we see is the sly, sneaky backstabber. So I wanted to have these two characters immediately encapsulate that idea, because as Star Trek fans, as Star Trek readers, we've seen those tropes and archetypes before, and I wanted to make it clear from the very beginning to put them both on the same ship is something we've never really seen. They've either been one or the other. So to put them in this power dynamic where it's, I kind of took some inspiration from The Hunt for Red October, with having a political officer on board the ship, which is the role that Helek kind of fills in. Is she's the one saying, well, I speak for Romulus, the captain, you just speak for your crew, so I'm obviously the one who has more influence. But he's the one who's in command, and they're out there on the frontier, so it's like, who's really in charge of this crew? So immediately putting them into at loggerheads. And it was just fun to create a Romulan character who could feel like the Romulan equivalent of Riker, but also to take the character of Medaka, to take the character of Helek, and have somebody who is the kind of zealous fanatic that we've seen in the Tal Shiar, but push that much further. Because that stemmed out of, as you say, the idea of something that we see in one of the episodes of the show, when we see what happens when people are exposed to the admonition. We see people, you know, taking their own life because this thing is so terrifying, and you know, it literally drives them insane in a moment, to the point that they cannot live with the knowledge. And the kind of the inference is that only people with a very, very strong mental constitution can be exposed to this thing and kind of carry on. And so my immediate thought was, what if you fell in the middle? Is you're not quite driven insane by it, but you're not quite strong enough to handle it either. So Helek is somebody who has been exposed to this, and instead of being destroyed immediately, she fractures slowly and gradually starts to come apart. And you see this in the course of the story, as the narrative goes on, she becomes more and more obsessed, and she crosses more and more lines. And this is because what she's been exposed to has just fractured her mentally. So what we're seeing is her slow collapse in the middle of this situation where everything is going to hell. She finds herself, you know, just falling to pieces, because she's, at the end, all she has is just this one idea that has been planted in her mind to be this zealous anti-android crusader, and that eventually destroys her.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really interesting dynamic. It reminded me a little bit of the TNG episode Face of the Enemy, where Troy is disguised as this Tal Shiar officer, and then you have this Commander Tereth who is really against kind of all that the Tal Shiar stands for. But Chrissie, I just wanted your thoughts on kind of the Romulan ship and characters and what you thought of that.
I like the idea of how you said it's a mirror to Titan. I wasn't thinking of it that way. And it's very... I like the way how that it's laid out with, again, you have Helek otherizing the other people, the non-Romulans that are on the ship. And, that guy's a Reman, and that guy's... I forget the other group that was there.
There's some others. Yeah. Garidian was one, and a few others, which I know were deep pulls, James.
And so that it's the opposite. It's the mirror, but it's also the opposite, because there is this derision that you feel toward the commander and toward the fact that he's put together this crew of all different types of people, and that it works. It's almost like she gets there and she sees that the thing that she doesn't believe in works better than the thing that she believes in, and then she has to re-evaluate everything. Yeah. And then, of course, she's interrupted with this huge issue of the androids and her having seen the admonition. And it does make me wonder if she what kind of a person she would be if she had never encountered this. If she'd just be going along as your standard Tal Shiar, occasionally looking for androids, but not really as concerned about that as her own power, because that's how she comes off at the beginning.
I mean, I thought of her as she is the Tal. It's interesting that you say that, like how she has this kind of derision for the crew, and I think that there is definitely, you get a sense that the Tal Shiar think they're the smartest people in the room every time. So she's very much, she has that arrogance, and because she is Tal Shiar, she knows that everybody on the ship is afraid of her, and to an extent she's kind of bulletproof. So she's quite happy to sort of stand on the bridge and criticize everything the captain does, because she knows she can get away with it. But then she has this other, so that's probably how she would have spent her life, and it would have ended up with maybe somebody ends up accidentally flushing her out of an airlock after they got too sick of her, or she ends up taking over the ship. That would, one of those things probably would have been the way her arc would have ended. But when she comes across the androids, that kind of brings all the negativity of the admonition back to the surface, and then she starts on this road to kind of falling apart.
Yeah, and the fact that she knows things about the crew members that the commander doesn't, so she has that extra little bit of power that she can wield over him.
I mean, there is the suggestion there as well that she's been put on that ship precisely because he has a bit more latitude about what he's done. He does have aliens on his ship, the non-Romulans, I should say. That he is a bit more of a kind of decent guy. So the kind of the suggestion is the Tal Shiar are like, well, we need to keep an eye on this guy because he's a bit too much of a free thinker, and we can't have that.
Yes. I wrote in my notes, Gorbachev and Putin. It's attempts at openness and bringing everybody back together. I know there's a lot more with Gorbachev than that, but yeah. And then Putin, who's KGB and is continuing to be KGB, just in a different name. So, just to carry on the Cold War. Sorry, go ahead.
There's very much with the idea of the ships being a mirror of each other. Is one of the threads that I come back to is the idea that Riker and Medaka are kind of, despite whatever decisions are made by their powers that be, by their governments or their commanders, when it comes down to it, they are the ones at the sharp end. They are the ones out in the middle of nowhere dealing with the issues that people light years away sitting in a nice comfortable office have signed off on. It's like, well, now we're the guys who have to deal with this. And that is the thing that is the most similar about the two of them, is they both have to deal with the consequences that have been decided, but men far, far away have made these decisions. We have to handle it, and we have to. And there's only two ways you can handle it. Will you allow yourself to be pushed around by those decisions, or will you try to be true to a code of conduct? And that's what both men have in common.
So Brendan, just wanted to get your thoughts on the Romulan ship and those characters.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciated the character of Medaka, because like my favorite species in Star Trek, when I was first introduced to Star Trek was the Romulans, and then with Deep Space Nine it became the Cardassians, because the Cardassians are awesome. But one of the reasons that I love the Cardassians so much is because they're not just a one-note alien race that we get in Star Trek, and the Romulans have basically always been, except for the original series. It seems like the original series Klingons and Romulans switched to become the next generation Klingons and Romulans, like for their motivations and whatnot. And you called back to Mark Leonard's character, and he does feel a lot like that. He does feel like a different type of Romulan. So I appreciated this character a lot because he wasn't just, I'm going to lie to you and do subterfuge all the time. He opened himself up to Riker in that conversation that he had in the ready room there. So I just appreciated his character a lot because it was a new take on a Romulan.
And it made me also think not only the TOS Romulans, but the Rahansu novels by Diane Duane, because you do get an extension of that kind of honorable Romulan and seeing them in even more depth, and I love those novels, and it made me think of that as well. So, and I think you're a fan of them as well, James, right?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, hand on heart, I have to say, among my sort of top 10 favorite Trek books, The Romulan Way by Diane Duane and Peter Morwood is one of my favorite books.
Same here for me. It's one of the top 10 for me.
And I always loved, what Diane had done with the Rehantsus. Like you say, is taking characters like the Romulan commander we see in the Enterprise incident and Mark Leonard's Romulan commander and building out the idea of that sort of, there's a kind of samurai kind of nature to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of gets...
And there's even like a special symbolic like giant sword, right?
and I like the idea of that, and I feel like you're right that Brandon, your point there about how that kind of gets lost a bit in TNG. We do see it a little bit. You see it in episodes like The Enemy and The Defector. You kind of reference to it there, and that's interesting to explore. Maybe there was a cultural shift behind the Romulan curtain, right, towards that kind of style of behavior. I think if you guys have ever read the Romulans comics that John Byrne did, which
I haven't.
That's got some great stuff in there about kind of honorable Romulans versus backstabby Romulans. And there's some really nice kind of like cultural, political, geopolitical stuff going in there. So, yeah, I mean, I wanted to just show up those two kind of aspects of the Romulan character we've seen in Star Trek and suggest as well, to go back to, I think, to your point, Justin, there is a line where Madaka says, the face we show you is not who we are. Just as the same way the face you show us is not all who we are. So when you see in Star Trek kind of monolithic culture, these monocultural people who, they're all one thing. It's like, well, they're not all one thing because a culture couldn't exist if everybody was all one thing. And it's just the impression that they give to outsiders. And I like the idea that the Romulans might even encourage that idea in order to kind of wrong foot other races into thinking one thing about them and not thinking of what they truly really are like.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to talk about, which we've talked about a little bit, but I think we have to talk about it. So Thaddeus Worf Troy Riker. I love the whole name. But so as you said, James, so Thad, we hear him referenced in Nepenthe. He's died some years before, but he's alive at this time. He's, I think, 6 years old or something like that. And I think it's interesting, like, to see this character. And of course, from what we've seen on the show, he likes to create languages and has a facility for speaking different languages and very imaginative. But at the same time, I think he's somebody that other kids his age find annoying at times, which I thought was interesting. Like, he's a little, like, maybe, I don't even know what the word is, but he's like a little bit too much sometimes for other kids. But kind of in the course of the story, you see, him with his parents, Riker and Troy, and how they interact together, which is lovely, and with the children, and also interacting with some of these AI, including this, one that he calls friend that's kind of hovering around and talking to him. And then there's something that happens at a certain point where he gets injured and he has to be kind of rehabilitated. But I thought it was really great just to get more of a window into this character that we've only heard reference. So I wanted to get your thoughts about kind of how you thought about building out that character just based on, what we know of him in Nepenthe.
Mm-hmm. The thing about Thad's character is when you watch the Picard show, he's not present, but his influence is present everywhere in that story. So what we see is not him, but his kind of gravitational influence on all of the lives that have occurred around him, his sister and his mother and his father. So I kind of looked at that and I thought, well, I'll try to kind of back engineer what we saw and what kind of person would he be to have that effect on people. And also at the same time, Michael Chabon, who's one of the writers and producers on Picard, had written all of this backstory about the language and the fictional planet of Ardani that he created. And he had all of this stuff as reference, and he very kindly gave me all of that as a reference and a resource. And I think just recently he's posted all of that stuff up online on his blog. So if you want to go and read it, there's tons and tons of material there about this fictional culture and planet that Thad created. So once I had that idea, I had the sense of who the kid was. I wanted to create somebody who feels realistic, feels like he can have agency in the story, because the problem is with a lot of the way that young kids are written, it's difficult to make them feel realistic, but also to make them feel like a compelling part of the narrative. I didn't want to make the decision that had been made back with, I say about Wesley Crusher is an example in early seasons of Star Trek. He's very poorly served. And I think it was clear that writers didn't really know how to handle a precocious, smart kid. and they kept on writing him into situations that didn't really reflect well on him. I didn't want to do the same thing with Thad. I wanted to try and make him feel like a well-rounded, realistic kid, but also give him something to do in the story. So I based that on my nieces and nephews. I tried to remember back to when they were that sort of age, and to try and get in that kind of idea that they were fun kids, but also sometimes they could be a little bit annoying, because to me that just feels authentic. So that was about kind of creating an authentic voice for him.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think you really accomplished that, because I thought it was a great character and well-rounded, like not perfect, but involved in the story and all that. So Brandon, just any thoughts you might have on Thad?
Well, I guess my only thought, you had it in a point here in our notes, but I'm curious as to like how this could relate to what happened to Thad's death, and if you considered that at all, because when we covered Picard season 1 over on Trick FM, our show called A Line, when I watched the series, I didn't like the aspect of the story where they were talking about, this positronic thing could have cured our kid. I didn't like that. But when this popped up in the book that these were androids and they did something to heal him, my initial thought was, could they have done something accidentally while they were healing him that led to his death later on, and now they can't get a hold of these androids because they've gone and run away because they don't want to be a part of the Federation, and this has kind of contributed to Thad's death? I don't know, is that something that you thought? Because I listened to your discussion with our friends Bruce and Dan over on their podcast, Positively Trek, and you had said in the interview that you didn't want to tell the story of how Thad died. You didn't want to end the story on a negative note like that. But I'm just wondering if that was something you were seeding in this story at all.
Well, definitely. There was a discussion that Kristen and I had. We wanted to have Thad to be part of the story from the very beginning. That was on the kind of, when we had the bullet point list of what this book's going to be about, that was right there. Thad's story, we're going to tell that story. But we're also going to lay some keel for the circumstances of his death. So, we don't say it explicitly in the novel, but you can draw a line between those two events. The suggestion is, the Jazari use their technology in order to save Thad's life. And, you could say, well, if they were still around when Thad falls ill years later, they could have saved him again. But because they weren't around, and because that technology, that positronic technology, was banned, that's the reason why, Thad dies. So it's not a question of the Jazari doing something wrong. It's a question of them doing something right, because Thad's story would have ended there if they hadn't been around to save his life. But the tragedy of the story is that when that recurs later in his life, they are not there to help him. No one is there to help him because of this decision that was made, and that is the grand tragedy of his life. I allude to it a couple of times in the story. If you kind of read between the lines, there's some points where the Jazari are talking about the cure, and they're saying, this could cause problems in later life. Just kind of keep an eye on that. Even right at the end, I think Zaid says to Thad, he essentially says to the kid, enjoy your life while it lasts. Because you've gone through this terrible trauma and things may recur later on, and sadly it does.
Yeah, and I definitely drew that line. Like, this has some influence on what happens later to him.
Me too.
So, Chrissy, any thoughts you had on Thad?
I love how he is well in the tradition of children in Star Trek being wise beyond their years. But that fits. It fits very well for a child of Riker and Troy. It feels like they would produce a kid who would be way beyond where he should be at the age of 6. And I thought he was a wonderful foil to what the Romulans were doing, because he has that, and the Jazari too, he has that, for lack of a better term, absolute candor of children. But I want to learn their language. Why can't I learn their language? They don't want you to learn their language. Well, but it's just their language, and I don't want to do anything bad with it. I just want to know it. And so you look at it and go, yeah, that's, what he's asking is not unreasonable to him, because he doesn't understand the politics, because there's no reason for the politics to get involved in his life. And I just love that.
I mean, that is kind of driven by, there's two impulses that you see recurring in him again and again. One is his search for a home. He doesn't feel like, although he has a loving family and he's surrounded by people who love him dearly, he doesn't feel like he belongs because he's not really in a place. They're just living on a spaceship, and he wants to have a place to call his own. He's driven by that, but he's also driven by this questing, this need to boldly go, right? And being the child of Deanna Troi and William Riker, of course, that's the kind of kid he's going to be. He is going to be precocious. He is going to be a little too big for his boots, a little too clever, because that's the kind of parents that he's got, And I think I tried to make him embody the best of what they were, but also the kind of, the annoying things that a kid like that would be like as well. That he is a little too smart for his own good, and he is, and he does. There, you can see there is a distance between him and other kids his age, because he doesn't quite know how to connect with them, because that's part of what he is. He's searching for a connection, and when he finds it in Friend, the Jazari AI, it's kind of for the first time he feels like, oh, here's somebody I can converse with on my level. And he feels that immediate connection, which to this point he hasn't had.
Yeah. And maybe to go over it a little bit, because I think we've talked about kind of some of the main aspects of the story, the Romulans, the Jazari, how Titan tries to deal with things and all of that. I mean, I think like in the end, the Jazari do have to leave. They've kind of neutralized the threat of Hellick, and they go back to this tribunal scene, and basically Medaka can have command of the ship, and Hellick goes to prison. So it kind of wraps up in that way. But I just have to ask, because I just loved seeing this story, and I hope that as far as these Titan novels and this new continuity, this isn't the only one that we have. I know you probably can't give away anything, but I'm just going to say I hope that we have more. That's all, because I think it leads off at an interesting place. Yes, it's fine. You don't have to answer.
I honestly don't know. If there are any plans for more Riker and Troi stories, I would love to see more of them. I think we've got a nice big gap that we could fill with more stories about this Titan crew. So absolutely, I would love to get the opportunity to tell those stories, or to see somebody else tell those stories. Because the Titan crew have always been the children of many parents. There's many different writers who worked on Titan, so there's a lot of other great authors out there. I'd love to see explore that. I think it's probably more likely we're going to see stories in the immediate interim, Picard stories about other characters that we haven't explored yet. But there's no reason why we couldn't come back to the Titan at some future point.
Yeah, I think next is like the Rios book or the Raffi book. Those.
Come on, James told you the two ideas that they had thought about, which hopefully we'll see sometime.
Yeah, Seven and I will probably be next. Yeah, for sure.
Or Worf.
Brandon, you make a good point there. Is that there are some really interesting characters. I'd love to see a Rios novel about his life in Starfleet before he decided to leave. And Raffi's a great character as well. I'd love to see a Raffi novel. The Worf as captain of the Enterprise novel, again, is a really interesting, cool idea. So it's not like we don't already have a whole bunch of other stuff, And then there's all the other characters we haven't even talked about. There's a lot of characters in Picard who have interesting backstories that we only see hints of that could easily expand into a novel.
Yeah. So there is one question that I have to ask, which is, if we go to The Last Best Hope, Una McCormack's novel, there are definitely some strong indications there that the supernova is not a natural phenomenon and that it's been artificially induced somehow. And there is a reference in this novel. There's the scientist Fadrell, who I think is working with Hellick on some stuff related to these androids, and basically there's a reference there where it said that he had a previous identity. He was involved in a project that's going to cost the lives of billions. So
I've got the quote if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
With the quote.
In his life before this one, the man who is now Vedrell had been part of a project so secret that it defied even the most Byzantine of Romulan schemes. But the fires of its failure had condemned billions to a certain death, and he shared a great deal of the responsibility.
Yeah, and so I think that was a surprise when I saw that in The Last Best Hope, and you seem to be following up on that a little bit. But I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, because there is this interesting thread that it is something that was not natural, and that would have some really interesting implications. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, James.
I cannot possibly comment on that.
Okay.
That's
but
a good
it's
thing.
very
That means that there's going to be more information about it.
Okay. But I just wanted to point out, because I it's definitely an interesting thread. So maybe, so Chrissie or Brendan, are there other kind of questions you have about other things?
No, I think we've done a really good job talking this book through. Like, this is, if you haven't read the book yet, guys, definitely read it.
Definitely.
Both of them. Last Best Hope is also very, very good. So definitely say pick these books up. So
I do want to say, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just had two very random questions or comments. I love that it's a fake. That was beautiful.
That was perfect, yeah.
And that's not a question. The Robinson is mentioned. Is that supposed to be Sisko's Robinson, or you can't say, or what?
Well, when I was just writing a list of ships' names, and immediately I thought, well, what ships should I put in there? What would be cool? So the Lionheart gets a reference. That's a ship from the Poison Chalice, which is a novel that I wrote. And I deliberately chose the Robinson because I knew that people who are fans of the Litverse would know that is Benjamin Sisko's starship. Okay. Now, whether that is Benjamin Sisko's starship in the Picard timeline, who knows? But that was definitely in my intention, was it to kind of remind you of Sisko, definitely.
Very, very cool. I have to say, I think my favorite reference in here, though, is that there's a security officer with the same name as the original name of Tasha Yar's character, Macha Hernandez. I thought that was wonderful. So there was this Hernandez, and I'm like, okay, there's some Hernandez like Macha. It's like, wait a minute, that is the original name of the character. Just
that kind of,
love that.
She's a character I've been wanting to put into a Star Trek novel for a very long time, because one of the things that fascinates me is I love stuff that's on the cutting room floor, and I've read those. If you go back to like the original series Bible for TNG, and you can do it as well for all of the other shows, you see ideas for characters that eventually changed from one thing to another thing, and they got kind of put to one side. And there was the idea that there was like Hernandez, kind of based a little bit on Vasquez from Aliens, was going to be the security chief. And as I understand it, so the story goes, is Denise Crosby and Marina Sirtis tested for the roles of the security officer and the counselor, but the other way around. And eventually they decided, no, we're going to hire this actress to play this role and this actress to play the other role. So the role of Hernandez, who was originally going to be this Hispanic character, was rewritten as Tasha Yar and became the character that we know and love, played by Denise Crosby. And in my head, I kept thinking to myself, I like the idea that Hernandez went for the same job and didn't get it. So she's the one who, Picard had their files on her desk, and he's like, Yar, Hernandez, I'm going to go for Yar because she's slightly better for whatever reason. And so Hernandez is the one who's, didn't get the posting, and she's just been out there in space serving on other starships doing her job. And I wanted to bring her back to kind of put her back into the fictional world, as it were.
I think it's great. So James, I think this is a wonderful novel from the perspective of both Titan and Picard and all of that, and I hope listeners kind of pick it up. So go ahead.
Thank you for bringing those characters back again.
That
when we had you on for Unification 3, that was one of my questions. I knew you weren't able to answer it, but I'm like, is Vale going to be in this, or is these people going to be in it? Like, this is, as a fan of the novels, I love that these connections are in there. And I get, last thing is, okay, what is with you Picard writers and the eye violence? Like, what?
Oh, there was some serious eye violence in there.
that was deliberate. That was after seeing it on the TV show, I put that in there deliberately as a kind of little kind of connection to it, because it is quite horrible, It
was awful. But yeah, Brendan has we've been seeing lots
and just
of that.
As well, Chrissie, to call back to what you said about the point of the line, it's a fake.
Yeah.
When I was writing that line, I just wrote something like kind of, this is obviously a fabrication, and then I just thought, no, he should say it's a fake. because and when I thought of it, I burst out laughing, and I thought I'm going to put that in there. And if nobody gets the joke, it's fine. But some people would find it funny. So I thought if I found it funny, hopefully readers would find it funny.
That was perfect.
It was very funny. Yeah. So James, again, thank you for the discussion on this novel that you wrote. So tell our listeners where they can find you online if they want to connect.
Best place to find me is catch me on Twitter @JMSwallow, or you can come to my website, which is jswallow.com. That has all the information on there about all my writing, Star Trek and otherwise. And pretty much I keep that up to date as soon as I can.
All right, excellent. And anything you can tell us about any current and upcoming work for you?
I am working on a couple of other projects. Not much I can talk about right now. I have my 6th book in my Mark Dane thriller series. I'm just going through the proofs on that. That should hopefully be coming out towards the end of the year. I am working on a new Star Trek project. I can't really say much more about it than that. Other than keep an eye out. You'll probably be hearing a little bit more about it in the next coming months.
Nice.
Okay, excellent. We'll definitely look forward to that, and great that you write another Star Trek novel.
What about the plan? Is there anything you can tell us what the plan is?
Yeah, he very subtly didn't answer your question, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we forgot because we talked about it a lot. So,
what can I say? The thing I can't talk about is related to the plan.
Okay. Good.
That's good.
Okay,
good. We're looking forward to that.
The first rule of the plan is you don't talk about the plan.
It's enough for us to know there is a plan, it's coming together, or you're working on it somewhat. So very cool. We're looking forward to that. So yeah, again, thanks James for coming on, and we should let our listeners know we're going to have James Swallow on our next episode as well, talking about the Voyager episode Memorial that he pitched. So look forward to that next week. But yeah, until then, thanks so much, James.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Brandon, tell us, where can people find you when you're not plotting how to make a star go supernova?
You can find me on Twitter @Brandon Matella. You can find me here on the network with a show called Franchise Fatigue, which I host with my friend Zach, where we cover movies, remakes, and sequels. And we're currently in the middle of our Ocean's 11 series of movies. You can find me over on Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, where we cover all of Hitch's films in chronological order. And I have a show that's been rebranded as House Lights, where we do a film director. And we started with David Fincher, and we're currently in Christopher Nolan's work.
All right. And Chrissy, where can people find you when you're not thinking about who is going to be on the Titan crew in Lower Decks Season 2?
Yeah. I'm hoping we see Dr. Ree. I really do. He's got to have him in the cartoon. It's going to be more tough to have him in the real one.
Wouldn't that be funny if there were things that were pulled from the Litverse that James specifically did not include in this novel?
Yes.
There's nothing to say he wasn't there. He just wasn't involved. He was on vacation, you know.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So I am, of course, in the Federation Council Chambers on Facebook. If you'd like to talk about what we've been talking about in this episode on our thread, and the other threads as well for other shows. And I'm also on Twitter @The Goddess Livia, and that is spelled TheGoddessLivia. And there I tweet about Star Trek history and leftist politics. And you can also follow my work in history from that Twitter, and also by bookmarking the webpage my fellow historian partner Jason and I run, History with the Szilagys, at historywiththeszilagys.org, and with the same name on Facebook, and that's SCILAGYIS. And upcoming, there's going to be a new episode, a new writing of Ancient Aliens is BS, because they're doing a special with William Shatner. So that's supposed to be around the middle of the month, so it'll be a little bit after that.
Wait. There's an Ancient Alien special with William Shatner? Oh my goodness.
It's this ridiculous. You pull up the commercial. It's on both of their Twitter feed, Giorgio Tsoukalos's and Shatner's Twitter feed, and they're just looking at each other across a table like they both know something important. So I have no idea what they're going to do with this, but it's going to be fantastic.
I'm sure it'll be crazy. Well, glad that you'll be covering that. Well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek, and you can find me in our Facebook group, the Federation Council Chambers. So thank you very much for tuning into Infinite Diversity. Thank you to our executive producers, Ken Tripp, Tony Robinson, and Zach Moore. Thank you to Zach Tripp for the wonderful theme music, and Tony Robinson for the awesome show art. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and please subscribe. If you want to reach out, you can find the network on Twitter at UFP Earth, or our show specifically at IDIC Podcast. You can also talk about any and all of the UFP podcasts in our Facebook group called the Federation Council Chambers. Or you can email us at infinitediversity@ufp.earth. Many ways to get in touch with us. Please do it. So, as I mentioned before, on the next episode, we will have author James Swallow back to talk about the Voyager episode Memorial. Until then, peace and long life.
This has been a production of MTMR Media Works.